Well, we're continuing this morning our series about looking beyond ourselves and finding freedom from the self-focused life. And we'll be looking this morning at Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10, verses 32 through 45. So please turn there in your Bibles. Mark chapter 10, verses 32 through 45. Following as I read. They were on their way up to Jerusalem with Jesus leading the way, and the disciples were astonished, while those who followed were afraid. Again, he took the 12 aside and told them what was going to happen to him. "We are going up to Jerusalem," he said, "and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him, flog him, and kill him. 3 days later, he will rise." Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. "Teacher," they said, "we want you to do for us whatever we ask." "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. They replied, "Let one of us sit at your right hand and the other at your left hand in glory." You don't know what you're asking," Jesus said. "Can you drink the cup I drink, or be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with?" "We can," they answered. Jesus said to them, "You will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared." When the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Jesus called them together and said, You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be a slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. A few years ago, I read this book that became pretty popular. It's called Good to Great. Anyone read this book? Okay, one person. It's kind of become known as one of the most popular books on leadership and management, maybe in the last 20 years. And I think now it's actually about 4 million copies sold. And what this author did is he went and did a survey of over 1,000 different companies. And he tried to identify which are the most effective companies in terms of organizational leadership. And he used all these different metrics to measure it. And he narrowed it down to 11 companies that he found were the most effective. Right? And he looked at what are the things in these top 11 companies that make them so good at what they do. And he narrowed it down to what he calls 5 levels of leadership. Okay, level 1 leadership is someone who's a highly capable individual. Level 2 is a contributing team member. Level 3 is a competent manager. Level 4 is an effective leader. But a level 5 leader, the one at the top, is what he calls a great leader. Okay, and he looked at these companies looking at what took them from being good companies to great companies. And what he eventually came down to was that they were led by great leaders, level 5 leaders. And these were the 5 aspects of level 5 leaders that he defined. Number 1, a personal sense of humility. Number 2, a deep personal understanding of one's strengths and weaknesses. Number 3, a laser-like focus on the organization's purpose. Number 4, a passionate commitment to continuous learning. Number 5, a relentless determination to do what is right, not what is easy. And what stuck out to me was that number 1 quality. He said that great, not just good, but great companies are led by leaders who have a personal sense of humility. And this was one of the key attributes of what he called level 5 leaders. He says good to great leaders never wanted to become larger than life heroes. They never aspired to be put on a pedestal or become unreachable icons. They were seemingly ordinary people quietly producing extraordinary results. Right? He was actually surprised by this finding, right? If you think about the most powerful CEOs, you would think people who have oversized egos or, going on power trips. But what he actually found was that these leaders were actually very, very humble. He described them as humble, quiet, modest, mild-mannered, even shy. He said these attributes are only part of the picture because these leaders are also incredibly driven. But they don't seek success for their own glory. Rather, they see that success is necessary so that the organization can thrive. They share credit for their success, and they're the first to accept blame for mistakes. And they lead with calm and quiet determination. Right? And this was one of the key things that he noticed about these leaders. Right? They were what he calls servant leaders, people who had a deep sense of humility. Not people who led with power, authority, and ego, but people who served their organizations with genuine humility. And of course, we know that this principle should not surprise us, right? Because this is what Jesus taught us. And just as we read in Mark chapter 10, Jesus was teaching his disciples the same lesson. And last week we talked about how some of the disciples were arguing with each other about what? Who was the greatest among them, right? And because they were starting to gain in popularity and authority, they were starting to jockey with one another to see who was the best. And we see something similar happening here in this passage in Mark chapter 10, that these two disciples of Jesus out of the 12 came with a request. Lord, when you are seated on the throne in your kingdom, put one of us at your right and one at your left. All right? And what's going on here? These two guys, they're trying to claim their spot, right? They're trying to find that position of when Jesus was glorified as the Messiah. And of course, we know at this point, they didn't understand that Jesus was not that type of Messiah, right? He wasn't a Messiah that would rule with power, with political dominance, but he would become a servant Messiah. And here again, Jesus responds to them, and he says, you guys don't know what you're asking for. Right? You don't know what you're asking for. You don't know what it takes to take this position of honor. But in fact, he teaches them again. He says, when you look around at the world, people, the rulers around you, they lord it with authority. Right? But he says, not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be the first must be a slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And we see again, when the other disciples hear what's happening, they get upset. They're like, why are these guys trying to push ahead, right? Why are they trying to become first? They're taking our place, right? But Jesus is teaching them, if you want to become great, you must be a servant. And last week we talked about how Jesus said, to become first, you have to become what? Last, right? To become first, you have to become last. And we talked about what that meant last week, that to become last means we put others ahead of us. We lower ourselves. We take a position not of self-importance, but of servanthood and humility. And again, this is what Jesus is teaching us, that to become great, because you must become like a servant, Okay, being great is not about doing great things. It's not about being recognized. It's not about getting what we want. It's not about accomplishing our own goals and desires. But greatness, as defined by Jesus, is becoming a servant. And I think about what it means to be a servant. Okay, our culture here in America, we don't really have servants, right? I know there's some countries where people still hire personal servants, unless you're billionaire. None of us probably here have a servant, right? Anyone? No, okay. But there are people in our culture who serve us, right? And if you think about it, every day, there are people that help you carry out things, help you do things. They meet your needs. I think about if you go to a restaurant, right? I guess that today we don't call them waiters anymore. We call them servers, right? Servers, because they bring you your food. They clean up after you. They take care of your needs. Sometimes, we have people come to our house. They fix things, right? Maybe our plumbing or electrical, do, repairs. They come to serve us. All the time we have people delivering packages to our front door, right? They're serving us. I know many of us here, we have medical professionals. And every time I go to the doctor, I think, man, this guy's really serving me well. He asks me all these questions. He pokes my body. He does all this stuff. And he's just taking care of my health. Right? Same thing when I go get a haircut. I'm saying, wow, this is actually a very weird experience. This guy's using his personal skills to help me look decent. And he's actually being a servant to me. Maybe sometimes there's people who serve us that we don't see. Even in this building, We have people who come, they clean after us, they take out our trash, they make this school look nice and presentable. Right? These are all different kinds of people who serve us in different ways. And maybe some of us have been in that position, or maybe some of us have just been on the receiving end of that. Right? But this is kind of the picture that Jesus gives us of greatness. To be great, you need to become a servant, someone who's dedicated to meeting the needs of another person, right? To helping them, to providing for them, to taking care of them, and not being in a position of demanding for themselves, but doing what they can to help another person. And I think in many senses, when I'm served by someone else, it's very humbling in a way, right? It's humbling to have someone cut my hair or to serve me food, right? What did I do to deserve this? But in the same way, Jesus calls us to be humble servants before him. Okay, not to have the attitude of someone who's being served, but to have the attitude of someone who's serving someone else. Right? Can we say that about our lives? That when we look at ourselves, our focus is on how can I become a servant? Right? How has God called me to serve those around me in this world? And we know there's many different ways that we can be servants, but at the core, it's about looking at our heart, our attitude, right? Is my life more focused on receiving or accomplishing what I want, or is my life more focused on how I can be a blessing to other people? I think one of the great pictures of servanthood in the Bible is John the Baptist, and we read about him in John chapter 1. When John came, he came preaching a message of repentance, and people saw that many crowds were coming to him, and people were giving him attention, and at the same time that Jesus came. And they asked him in John 1:21, they asked him, "And who are you again? Are you Elijah?" He said, "I am not." "Are you the prophet?" He answered, "No." Finally, they said, "Who are you? Give us an answer to take back to those who sent us. What do you say about yourself?" John replied in the words of Isaiah the prophet, "I am the one calling in the wilderness. Make straight the way for the Lord." Now the Pharisees who had been sent questioning him, "Why then do you baptize if you are not the Messiah, nor Elijah, nor the prophet?" "I baptize with water," John replied, "but among you stands one who you do not know. He is the one who comes after me, the straps of whose sandals I am not worthy to untie." Right, here, John, we see that he has a very clear sense of who he is and what he's called to do. Right, he says, "I'm not a great prophet. I'm not the one you've been waiting for." What does he say? "I'm the one who came to prepare the way for that person." Okay, I'm a preparer of the way. He's the one who's rolling out the red carpet for Jesus. And he's saying that you shouldn't be focusing on me, but on the one who comes after me, the one whose straps of his sandals I'm not worthy to untie. Right? What is John's attitude like here? This is a man of deep humility. Right? He recognizes that his life is not about himself, but that he's called to prepare a way for Jesus. Right? He's shifting the focus away from himself. The interesting thing here is in Matthew 11, Jesus says this about John. He says, "Truly I tell you, among those born of women, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Yet whoever is the least of the kingdom is greater than he." And he says, look at John the Baptist. He is one of the greatest, right? You think about the great prophets or pastors or missionaries that we know and that we've seen through history. Jesus saying John the Baptist is one of the greatest. He's, one of the goats. He's at the top of the list, right? This is how great John is, that Jesus himself praises him so greatly. But even John himself, he doesn't see that about himself. His identity is focused on the calling that God has given to him, to prepare a way for Jesus, the one that he's not even worthy to untie his sandals. We read on in John chapter 3. John chapter 3, he says, "To this, John replied, a person can receive only what is given from heaven. You yourselves can testify that I said, I am not the Messiah, but I am sent ahead of him. The bride belongs to the bridegroom. friend who attends to the bridegroom waits and listens for him and is full of joy when he hears the bridegroom's voice. That joy is mine, and it is now complete. All right, John had a very clear sense that his mission was to put the focus on Jesus. Right? And we talked about this last week, how the disciples were trying to make it about themselves. Right? They're trying to say, look at us. Look at how great we are. Look at all the attention we're getting. But yet, what did they miss? They missed that they were in the presence of Jesus, right? The Son of God. And yet they're trying to shift the focus to themselves. But here John does the very opposite. He sees that he is simply a messenger. He sees that he is simply one to point the way towards Jesus. And we see here that true humility is not about putting ourselves down. True humility is not saying, oh, I'm such a loser, I'm so worthless, I have no good in this world. But to be humble means that we place ourselves in proper perspective towards God, right? Just like John did here. Right? John didn't say, I'm a worthless person, but he said, compared to the one I came to serve, I'm nothing. Right? I'm not even worthy to carry his sandals. And for us, that's a picture that Jesus gives us of humility, right? That we understand who we are relative to God. That we are not, we should not be the focus, but that we put the focus on the one who deserves the glory. In John 3:30, he says, he must become greater, I must become less. He must become greater, I must become less. All right, imagine someone saying that. Imagine a great leader. Imagine the president of your company or the leader of your college saying, I must become less. I must become less. But why is John saying this? He understands that his calling is not to become the center. But as Jesus rises on the stage, as more people come to see who Jesus really is, his job is to fade out into the background. Right? And that's his goal here, to become less. Just as Jesus taught us, to become great, we must become less. Pastor A.W. Tozer, he said this, as a sailor locates his position on the sea by shooting the sun, so we may get our moral bearings by looking at God. We must begin with God. We are right when and only when we stand in a right position relative to God. And we are wrong so far and so long as we stand in any other position. Right? Imagine a sailor navigating the seas at night. Right? How does he find his way? He looks at the stars. Right? He looks at the North Star. And he recognizes, I'm placing myself, my position, in relation to that star or to the sun. Right? In the same way as the people of God, we understand who we are when we understand our position relative to God. Right? That we are not great, we're not powerful, we're not mighty, but yet we're simply servants of the Most High God. Another pastor said it like this. He said, humility is understanding who you are in light of who God is. Humility is understanding who you are in light of who God is. Can we say the same as John? That our mission in life is not to increase, but to decrease. Right? Can we say like John? My goal in life is not to become greater, to receive more attention, to do the things that I want to do, or my goal is to become less. So that when people see my life, they won't see, oh, this is a great person, but they'll see, wow, this person's life points to something else. Right? When I see this person's life, I'm seeing something greater than them. I'm seeing a work in them. I'm seeing a curiosity about who it is that they serve and what they're living for. Right? If we take the place of prominence, we actually can stand in the way of people seeing God. Right? If we make it about us, we prevent people from knowing Jesus. But when we become less, when we become humble servants of the Lord, then we make a way for others to see Jesus. And we realize that we are simply called to be servants. What does this look for us on a day-to-day level? Maybe it means that when we go to work, we see ourselves as servants to those around us. We look for ways to serve people, maybe our customers or our coworkers or even our superiors. When we go to our families, we see this as an opportunity to serve God through our family, to glorify God through our service to them. Maybe a simple act of cleaning or washing dishes is a way of lowering ourselves even to our own family. Maybe in our relationships is an opportunity to show the love of God to other people, in our friends, our family, our community. Maybe even in our time of rest can be a time of communing with God, not just making it about entertaining ourselves or doing what we like to do, but giving praise to God in our free time. Maybe even our Sabbath, as we gather and worship, can not be about what do I get out of service, what did I enjoy about church today, but how did I serve other people? How did I serve the people that God placed around me? And for many of us, we think to live a life of a servant is pretty miserable, right? None of us wants to serve others. But in fact, as we grow closer to the heart of God, we see that this is truly an understanding of who we are, right? That when we understand who God has called us to be, we don't have to strive to be number one. We don't have to make ourselves the best or the greatest, but we can simply put God first in everything that we are and all that we do. I like what this pastor said. He said, be like John the Baptist. Prepare the way, declare the way, and then get out of the way. Get out of the way, all right? Maybe this morning, some of us, we need to get out of the way. Maybe get out of the way of ourselves. Maybe some of us this morning, we're putting too much focus on our own view of who we are, or getting what we want or what we desire. And God is inviting us this morning to be like John the Baptist, right? To say, I'm simply an unworthy servant, preparing the way for someone greater. He must become greater. I must become less. He must become greater. I must become less. Can we do that together this morning? Can we say, Lord, don't make us greater. Lord, make us less. Make us less. Help us to get out of the way. Help us take the focus off of us. Help others when they see my life to not look at me, but to look beyond me at the one I serve. Can we pray that together this morning? As we go into a time of communion together, let's remember the one who came to serve us. That Jesus didn't come and walk on this earth and say, hey, you guys, I want you all to do what I want. You know, you are my servants and my slaves. No, he came and he served us. He himself, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, stepped down into our midst, taking a human body and coming to serve us, right? Washing our feet, sacrificing himself, giving his life for us. And the invitation he gives us is to do the same. All right, so as we prepare our hearts for the communion this morning, let's pray together. Lord, thank you for what you've done for us. Help us to walk in the way that you showed us. Help us to be your servants. Let's just take a moment to prepare our hearts. And could I have the servers come forward, communion servers?